Section 4.8, Complex Numbers, Part 2. Today, students will be able to solve equations using complex numbers. Example 1, 5x squared plus 20 equals 0. Okay, so if you notice, there is only one x, and it's x squared. So to solve this, we are going to get everything away from the x squared. So to move positive 20 to the other side, we are going to subtract it. So that gives me 5x squared equals negative 20. Now hopefully if you notice, x squared still isn't by itself, it still has that 5. So to get rid of the 5, we divide by 5. So x squared equals negative 4. And then to get rid of the squared, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So remember, the square root of negative 4 is the same thing as negative 1 times 4, which remember breaks down into the square root of negative 1, times the square root of 4, and whenever you take the square root you get plus or minus. Okay, the square root of negative 1 is I, the square root of 4 is 2, so your answer is x equals plus or minus 2i. Press pause and try solving 2x squared plus 30 equals 0. So again, first thing you should notice is that the x squared term is the only x, so I need to get everything away from it. So to move positive 30 to the other side, we are going to subtract it. To get rid of the 2, you divide by 2. So x squared equals negative 15. And then you take the square root of both sides, and you can simplify the square root of negative 15 as negative 1 times 15. Simplify it to the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 15. I cannot simplify the square root of 15, so your answer is x equals plus or minus I root 15. Hopefully you notice in example 3 it is very different than example 1 and 2 because now you have an x squared term and you have an x term. So first thing you need to do is get it equal to 0 so that we can start solving this. So that gives me 3x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. Now you could try to factor this, you could complete the square, or you could use the quadratic formula, and I would highly recommend using the quadratic formula. So if you don't remember, the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. So remember that 3 is a, that invisible 1 in front of the x, negative 1 is b, and c is the number all by itself. So x equals negative 1 is going to make it positive 1, plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times a times c. Everything is divided by 2 times a, which is 3. Okay, keep going. That gives you x equals 1 plus or minus 1 squared is 1, and then negative 4 times 3 times 2 gives me minus 24, all divided by 2 times 3, which is 6. So now, keep simplifying. 1 minus 24 gives me 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 23 over 6. The only way to simplify the square root of negative 23 is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 23. So that is going to give me 1 plus or minus I root 23 over 6. And then if you forgot, when we're talking about complex numbers, since we have an I, you have to write it as the real part. So 1 divided by 6 plus or minus, and then the imaginary part. And remember, if you want to put the I up top or if you want to put the I out to the side, it doesn't matter, just as long as you have an I in your answer. Press pause, and I want you to solve x squared equals 4x minus 5. Alright, first thing you need to do is to make it equal to 0, and if I can, I would keep my x squared positive, and I would move the 4x and I would move the 5. So to move positive 4x, you subtract it. To move negative 5, you add it. Okay, again, I would use the quadratic formula because we have x squared and we have x. So negative b, so negative negative 4 makes it positive 4, plus or minus b squared, so negative 4 squared, minus 4. A has that invisible 1 in front of it. C is 5. Everything is being divided by 2 times a. Okay, continue simplifying. X equals 4 plus or minus negative 4 squared, which gives me 16. And then negative 4 times 1 times 5 gives me minus 20. And then 2 times 1 gives me 2. Okay, so now keep going. So under the radical, that gives you 16 minus 20, which gives me negative 4, over 2. Then remember the square root of negative 4 is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 4. So the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of negative 1 is I, all divided by 2. Now the real part, 4 divided by 2 leaves you with 2. 2i divided by 2 leaves you with just I, and that's your final answer. X equals 2 plus or minus I.